there friends, you're on the Military of Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. During the previous night, between the 6th and the 7th of February of 2026, the Russians once again attacked the territory of Ukraine with hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. And this map was published this morning by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see the approximate routes of Russian attack. As you can see, the Russians were using drones to attack objects through Ukraine to carry out reconnaissance operation, and the Russians were using, at least according to the author of this map, three types of missiles. The Russians were using Ha-101 cruise missiles. We're talking about these red lines that were moving from the east and the western direction, and as you can see, mainly the Russians were attacking the western part of Ukraine during the night. Furthermore, the Russians used the Kalibr missiles that were launched from the area of the Black Sea, and these missiles also attacked and were launched in the direction of the western part of Ukraine. And the Russians most likely used several hypersonic Zircon missiles that were launched also from the south, and also these missiles were launched in the western direction. So, summarizing everything, we can say that during the previous nights, the Russians were tasked to attack objects of energy infrastructure, almost only in the western part of Ukraine. So, when talking about information that we received during the night, we haven't received almost anything when talking about videos. We received just different articles, different statements, and so on. And when summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the Russians attacked the following objects. First of all, the Russians once again attacked the substation 750 Kievskaya, which is located to the west of the city of Kiev. This is not the first time when the Russians attacked this object of critical infrastructure. Since the beginning of January, we received lots of updates from this area. For example, on the 3rd of February, the sources reported the Russians attacked the substation with 12 Ha-32 missiles and 2 Zircon missiles. Furthermore, we have a video where we can see the differences between attacks somewhere around the 3rd of February. So as you can see, the Russians used dozens of missiles, but just one missile or two missiles hit the target. That's it. So, and this is a very important substation because Ukrainians use this substation to connect the city of Kiev with the western parts of Ukraine, more precisely to connect the city of Kiev with the Rovinska nuclear power station. So with this an object of energy infrastructure. And if Russians are able to destroy this Kievskaya 750 kV substation, then this can lead to significant collapse and problems to the city of Kiev, to heat, to energy supply, and so on. So which means that the Russians are really tasked to do this. Also, the sources reported that the Russians attacked another object of energy infrastructure, and this time we're talking about the Tripolska power station, which is located to the south of the city of Kiev. As of the end of the 2nd of February, it is very difficult to understand the exact status of this power station, because you know that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians attacked this substation for many times, and we have lots of videos. And for example, this is the video. This video was published, for example, on the 9th of November of 2025. As you can see, as a result of attack during the November of 2025, the power station was significantly damaged. Or what else we have during the same period of time? This is the picture of destructions. This is a picture of videos of attacks. So we had probably a few years ago, maybe in 2024, we had a video when the substation was covered with a very huge fire. Anyway, the substation is about to be destroyed completely by the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the Ukrainians are using this power station to supply and support the city of Kiev as well. So it seems that the Russians, before the end of the winter, are tasked to cut the city of Kiev from energy supply completely. Okay, now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the western parts of Ukraine that was attacked by the Russians. According to this map, as you can see, we have several areas of focus, mainly around the city of Rivne and around the settlements of Ternopil and Lvov. So what the Russians were attacking there? According to information we have, the Russians attacked the Burstynskaya power station, one of the most important power stations in the western parts of Ukraine. So this territory was attacked, but by the morning of the 7th of February, we haven't received anything that can confirm or to show us the damage that the Russians managed to deal. Most likely in coming days, we will get fresh satellite pictures, and then we will understand understand the exact damage the Russians dealt. Another important area that was attacked, the substation Zapadnoukrainska 750, a major substation responsible for power distribution in western Ukraine and interconnection with the European power grid. So this substation was damaged. In coming days we will receive the satellite pictures, and then we will understand whether the Russians managed to deal the significant damage or not. And another important power station that was damaged or attacked by Russians is the Bratvir thermal power plant, which is located almost in the most western part of Ukraine. So once again, summarizing everything, we see that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were mainly concentrated on attacks of energy infrastructure of the western parts of Ukraine. And currently, the Russians are tasked a very simple thing. They try to to split the entire energy infrastructure of Ukraine into several pieces. But more precisely, the Russians are trying to create something like nuclear islands. So we have, Ukraine still have 3 nuclear power plants that operates: Rovno nuclear power plant, South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, and Khmelnytskaya nuclear power plant. And the Russians are trying to create islands around these nuclear power plants, isolated islands. If the Russians are able to create the isolated islands around these power stations, nuclear power stations, this will allow the Russians to destroy completely the entire energy infrastructure of Ukraine without any possibilities to restore. And this might become a very huge pressure on Ukraine's authorities, on Zelensky himself, to force him to accept Russia's demands. Furthermore, the sources reported that during the previous night, the Russians attacked several warehouses through the territory of Ukraine, most likely warehouses that Ukrainians were using for military purposes. Furthermore, we had a report that US wants to conclude a peace deal in Ukraine in March and hold elections in May, but this is unlikely. So this is the situation. At the same time, we received the report that Ukrainians were attacking the territory of the Russian Federation with drones, and we have very interesting updates on this matter as well. The Russians are saying that during the previous night, between the 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. of Moscow time on February 7th, the Russians destroyed 82 drones that were flying deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. And the most important thing, that 45 of them were destroyed or brought down by the air defense forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation over the Volgograd region. So this is the region of Volgograd, and I would like to point to attention that this is a very important region, and this is a very important place, because here we have, first of all, the Kapustin Yar launching site. So this is the launching sites for Oreshnik missiles, Oreshnik systems. So this launching site is located exactly in this area. And another important thing is that Russia used the Volgograd region and this territory as a launching site for their strategic aviation. So every time when the Russians attack the territory of Ukraine, usually they use this territory as a launching site or as a transport corridor for aviation to reach these launching sites. So which means that Ukrainians launch their drones in this direction, probably with the purpose to probably to mess with the Russian air defense forces, or maybe to force them to make a friendly fire, or maybe to attack Russian aircraft. So very difficult to understand, but the Ukrainians were trying to do something, or they're at least trying to test new approaches, new tactics, how to fight with Russian strategic aviation. Another important update is coming from the area to the north of the city of Moscow. The sources reported that Ukrainians attacked a chemical plant on the territory of the city of Redkina. The Redkina chemical plant in the Tver region was subjected to a massive attack by aircraft drones overnight. And here we have lots of updates and videos of consequences of those attacks. As of now, very difficult to understand what was the main purpose of the use of this chemical power plant, but probably the Russians were using this chemical plant for the military purposes. So we believe that during the 7th of February we will receive additional updates about missile attacks, about consequences. As of now, we know for sure that there are power outages, schedules, and so on. The situation continues deteriorating for Ukraine without any signal or any light, let's say signal, a sign in the end of the tunnel that everything could be restored very, very soon. Another important thing, I would like to remind you that yesterday there was an assassination attempt in the city of Moscow, and the very, very high-ranked general, lieutenant general, was attacked by somebody. And today we received the report that the executor was arrested, but he was arrested, this is very important, on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. The sources are saying that, he was arrested, maybe not there, but he was arrested somewhere in the Middle East. Just imagine yourself, yesterday there was an assassination attempt, and today he was arrested somewhere on the territory of the Middle East, and the sources are saying that he was promised to return back to the territory of the Russian Federation for additional investigations. And this is a very important thing, because in any other case, under the pressure, for example, of the United States of America, or there won't be any extradition of executor, but due to the fact that the executor would be transferred back to the territory of the Russian Federation, this means that the Western countries, especially the United States of America, wants to show that states have nothing with this assassination attempt, and it is very important now to understand who stands behind this attempt and who stands behind attempts to break and to ruin the negotiation process between Russia, Ukraine, and basically the European Union and the United States of America. So this is a very important step. We will understand everything in coming hours, and then we will see what the Russians are going to do with this. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates and changes. Despite the fact that pro-Ukrainian sources are saying that Starlink, the great disconnect of Starlink has changed the game, has changed the rules along the line of combat contact, we see that the Russians are regrouping. We see that the Russians are trying to find a solution, or the Russians are trying to make the Ukrainians think that Starlink was a very important part of their, let's say, military forces. During the previous 12 hours, huge changes on the ground were recorded in the eastern Zaporozhye direction. As you can see, we have lots of flags, lots of updates. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 6th of February, and this is the situation by the end of the 7th of February. The Russians established complete control over the territory along R85 road. We have a video that confirming this. Here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation along the tree line to the west of the road R85, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. Basically we colored everything to the east of this point. As you can see, the gap, this pocket, was completely colored under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources add that additional territories to the west, and it seems that the railways between the settlements of Pologi and the settlement and Zaliznychny is about to be taken by the Russians completely. It's just one small pocket, small gap left, which most likely would be captured by the Russians. Furthermore, another important update is that the Russians currently control, according to different sources, up to 70 or even 80% of the city of Zaliznychny. The Ukrainians control just 30 or 20, and most likely the Ukrainians are about to leave this territory completely. So it seems that in coming days or in coming hours, both the Minister of Defense and the Group of Forces East will confirm complete control over the territory by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. A very interesting situation, and the control over the settlement of Zaliznychny allows the Russians to continue advancing further in the direction of the city of Orekhov. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing in the direction of the cities of Verkhnya Tertsa, Vozdvizhenka, around the settlements of Krynichne, Tverkova. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians, as you can see, improved their positions significantly, and the Russians are keeping advancing. But I would like to remind you that yesterday several neutral observers, neutral experts, stated that after unregistered users were cut off from using the terminal, Russian attack intensity suddenly and sharply dropped, at least in the Chernovat and Barova directions. So we see that we still continue receiving sometimes opposite updates about the situation, but we see that at the same time the Russians are keeping advancing despite these problems and so on.
Mit navn er Michelle Christensen, og sammen med Skagenfood laver jeg MK Måltidskassen, færre kalorier, flere proteiner.
I dag kan din nabo faktisk være hacker.
As for the Dnipropetrovsk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we received a report that Russians began advancing in the northern direction towards the railway station, toward the railways, between the villages of Veselaya and Mizhova. So these are the changes on the ground, and this information was provided by different pro-Russian sources. This is a very interesting situation. It seems that the Russians are trying to send additional reconnaissance and sabotage groups in the northern direction just to check and to understand the status and the quality of Ukraine's defense, and most likely after this first wave of attack, the Russians will begin advancing in the northern direction with the regular army. As for the Dobropolye direction, according to different sources, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians improved their positions significantly around the settlement of Belitska. It seems that the Russians encircled the settlement of Belitska from the north and from the south, and the Ukrainians were caught in cauldron. So, which means that in coming days, after the Ukrainians are being exhausted, the Russians will try to attack, establish complete control over the territory. As for the Konstantinovka direction, nothing special. As for the Slavinsk direction, we have a lots of updates, and most of them concerns the situation along MO3 road. Every single day we receive lots of updates from this territory, and all these updates are just about one thing. There are very heavy clashes, and the Russians are about to establish complete control over the first defense layer and to improve their positions through the second defense layer of the Slavinsk direction and of the settlement of Alexandrovka. So many sources stated that Russians improved their positions in this region and that the Russians are keeping advancing. Furthermore, the Russians began bombing and attacking the settlement of Fedorovka Druga with artillery and with aviation, which means that the Russians are approaching the settlement and are preparing themselves before the beginning of the battle for this territory. As for the Kupiansk direction, nothing special. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, we received lots of updates. First of all, let's discuss this video. Here we can see another concentration of the armored forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians continue bringing additional forces to stabilize the situation, but when the Russians discovered these forces, the Russians began attacking this territory with drones. So another temporary deployment point was significantly damaged. As for the changes on the ground, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the group of forces north stated that as a result of clashes, the armored forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions significantly around the settlement by the name of Chugunovka. This village is located along the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and we see that the Russians are keeping advancing in the northern direction, and it seems that now the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over the border and to create a small buffer zone. And probably when the Russians finish the creation of this buffer zone, the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the southwestern direction deep inside of the Kharkiv region. So we see that both the Sumy offensive operation and the Kharkiv offensive operation intensify, and most likely the summer and spring military campaigns, lots of updates we will receive exactly from this area. As for the Sumy direction, we see that the Russians continue creation of a very powerful foothold on the Ukrainian side of the border, and during the previous 12 hours additional changes on the ground were recorded. So this is the situation by the end of the 5th of February, this is the 6th of February, and this is the beginning of the 7th of February. The Russians continue offensive operation, and it seems that the Russians have a tactical task to establish control over the settlement of Novodmitrievka and over this huge forest around the village. So in coming days, the heaviest clashes are going to take place for this territory. This is a very important foothold that the Russians may use for further offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Krasnopolye. This forest will allow the Russians to protect themselves during the spring and summer military campaigns against drones, and Russians will be able to establish and to install and to build up additional, let's say, equipment and additional, vehicles for the offensive purposes. So very interesting dates, 7th of February. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. And most likely during the upcoming hours, we will receive additional updates and videos about the situation, about the consequences of Russian attacks. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.